On today's episode of the ThriveMore podcast, I interview Jennifer Speciale. What a great last name, right? She is an executive recruiter. She's worked with Amazon, Google, McKinsey. She was one of the first employees at Indeed.com. Her expertise is interviewing or helping interviewees, and she has her own company that does that now. Today, we're going to talk about why do women apply for fewer jobs than men. So equal skill sets, equal need, equal desire, and equal abilities, everything being equal, women will apply for many fewer jobs than men. And she's going to talk about why. And we're going to talk about, what to do in an interview, what not to do in an interview, how to be a great interviewer, what you don't want to do as an interviewer, but also just some tips and tricks on how to grow your career, but she has some great data behind that as well. So this one's interesting and it really picks up some speed at the end. So I know you're going to enjoy this and it's very insightful. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jennifer Speciale, and she is special. You're really going to dig this. She has a career. She's built a career as a high-level executive recruiter, and candidates and other leaders have sought her out for her expertise, whether it be career transition, seeking a promotion, how to be better at storytelling, or even how to prepare for some of the world's most difficult interview processes. And we'll talk about that. Utilizing multiple language skills, Jennifer has built strong, successful teams throughout North America, Latin America, Europe, and even parts of Asia. So we've got a lot to unpack today. Jennifer, welcome to the ThriveMore podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You bet. So I'm excited to chat with you because there are so many things happening in our economy. Certainly, as this podcast is being recorded, there are major tech companies announcing layoffs. There are manufacturing companies announcing layoffs. But there's also just a shift of the knowledge workers from one specialty to another. And I think we could really help some of the listeners who may be going through that personally, or maybe are sitting on the decision of, do I leave corporate America and go try to do my own thing? And we can talk about all that. But before we do, could you just dive in a little bit, talk about your background and how you got to the level of expertise that you have now and making this a career?
Yes. So some of the companies that I worked for, Google, McKinsey, Amazon in particular, they really have cultures that encourage beg for forgiveness, don't ask for permission. So they're already very entrepreneurial environments that encourage a bit of fearlessness. But with that fearlessness comes the need to be really informed on the strategic objectives of the organization. So you don't necessarily want to just jump in an uninformed way, but you really want to find your niche and do it well. Having done all of those, worked in those kinds of environments and then starting my own company, it's a similar kind of fearlessness and focusing on really what gives me energy, what I'm passionate about.
Helping other people. Yeah. So when you were a recruiter at Google and Amazon, which are just two giants, in the business world, and you're right, I've read, I haven't read a ton around Google as far as like a biography or the founder story, but I have Amazon, and I love the way Jeff Bezos built that company. And obviously he built an amazing, world-class, once-in-a-lifetime company. But talk to us about that experience of working for those two specific companies, because McKinsey is a little different beast. But what did you learn at Google and Amazon that you now are applying to help your clients in your own business?
What I learned is that it's so important to be a good storyteller of your experience. And ideally, in any circumstance, imbue that with metrics. So it's not enough to just be amazing at what you do, but for both of those organizations in particular, you've got to be a very effective communicator in the way that they are accustomed to hearing that, which is typically somewhat black and white, and then with lots of metrics. So you've got to very clearly articulate the start and the stop of your project or your study, whatever you were working on, and what your individual contributions were. Even if you were super senior level executive, you had some kind of impact that would not have occurred if you weren't there. And you have to be able to really articulate that, whether you're already inside and working towards a promotion or you're interviewing with those organizations. And having learned so much about that and shadowing other recruiters' interview processes and hearing that kind of feedback that interviewers just didn't garner the kinds of facts or details from candidates that they wanted to hear, I learned that people have to really articulate what their experience was. I liken it to, you could have studied Spanish for 10 years, but if you only learned Spanish from people in Mexico City, you may not speak great Spanish in Spain or in Colombia because they have different nuances and different accents. So it's very similar to that.
So are you speaking, when you talk about storytelling, because I am a huge proponent of competency selection interviewing, behavioral interviewing.
Yeah.
And that is really about telling a story around how you accomplished something or overcame an obstacle or worked with a team to get a job done. Is that what you're speaking to? Is having that beginning, middle, end, and what it resulted in, the resources you need? Just open up a little bit about that.
Yes, definitely. It's being able to very clearly articulate specific examples of when you created impact, how and why. So if you worked on a certain solving a certain problem or built something new, being able to articulate where that problem came from, how it was identified. Did you as an individual identify that, or was it something your leader, your manager asked you to do? And then how that challenge unfolded. Did you dive deep on it? Did you do research? Did you bring in people from other verticals? What kinds of resources did you have or did you not have? All of those details are not granular, and they help an interviewer or other colleagues, maybe leadership, if you're trying to gain recognition and get promoted. All of those details are so crucial because it adds dimension to your own accomplishments and helps others understand what your impact was. So I really dive deep with my clients and at my companies with my candidates to help them flesh those accomplishments out. And no detail is too small because you can't assume that people just know. Your leaders just, they work with you and they see you for lunch or they see you in the hallway, so they know what you're doing. Don't assume that. Everybody is focused on their own thing that they're involved in, their own challenges. So treat everybody as a blank slate and present a really thorough understanding of your role.
The current climate is, not everyone, but a lot of people feel I'm owed something. I've been here for 4 years. I'm owed a promotion, and I'm here to tell everybody you're not owed anything. The world doesn't owe you a damn thing. You need to earn everything you have. And what I just heard you say is, have your stories read down, not made up stories, your real stories of what you've accomplished. Have that ready to go. And even though your boss probably watched you, or maybe you're interviewing in a different department, watched you do it, they saw glimpses of it. And we make the assumption that, oh, well, you know what I did, so I'm going to leave that out. Tell a story like it's a Hollywood script, and that anybody would be engaged and lean in, even if they were part of it. And I would say, and I'd love your opinion on this, but most people are pretty poor at interviewing. But I'll double down on that and say most interviewers, not the interviewee, the interviewer is even worse.
Yes.
Hey, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses?
Yeah.
What would you hypothetically do in this situation? That's all hypothetical. It doesn't matter.
Tell me about yourself. The worst question ever. Like my favorite color or professional, like where do you go with that?
Exactly. And what's crazy is they don't teach. We're going to be either interviewing, or we're going to be, hopefully in leadership, we aspire to lead, we'll be an interviewer. And that is not taught in school. It's not taught in graduate school. I went to business school, wasn't taught in business school. So the most core fundamental skill to advance your career or to build your own company is not taught. It's
Indeed.
not taught, which is it's a crime, and it creates a great opportunity for you for to come in and start a company to help people. But if you can talk about when you were at McKinsey, you you really were working with change management, which in 2024, I mean, it's all about change management, right? Can you speak to that?
Well, and I wanted to just emphasize one of the points that you made.
Yeah, run it back, sure.
I would tell either people that reported to me, people on my team, or just peers, people that I hired once they joined the organization, even as very executive level leaders, keep a running track of your accomplishments. Don't assume anything. Anytime something goes well or something goes bad, document all of it and
Hmm.
start the day that you start, because you'll have to look back on that in a year. There will be things from Q1 you totally forgot about that are important and significant. And if you accomplish something major, you may have had a bumpy journey. More than likely, you had a bumpy journey, and your leader won't know about all of the ins and outs of that. So, keeping track of the bumpy journey and how you still came out successful, those are all still valuable details. And sometimes even better, even more valuable than just the successes. Maybe you learn from failure.
I'm so glad you said that because the woman I think you before we went live here, the woman that you saw kind of running around behind me and getting this set up, Becca Brennan, she was employee number two at Rockbox Fitness, our first brand. And when I interviewed her, I used competency selection interviewing. She told me about a time that she didn't succeed, and then I saw how she used an opportunity where she didn't succeed, didn't get what she was going after, and then pivoted, was resilient, had tenacity, and went and accomplished something else, right? And then that built a story around that. But it started with, well, here's how I failed. Here's what I
Right.
went after, and then and I didn't. And that taught or that showed me so much more about her personality and her traits
It's
than,
really
yeah, I
true.
just did this and I crushed it. Yeah,
I've
yeah.
always coached people that there is no shame in failure stories. I work so much with, I work a lot with people in technology, and candidates will ask me, well, how do I talk? I want to tell this story about this big thing that I worked on, but ultimately it never launched. And I'm like, that doesn't matter. What did you learn from it? Because there can be so many lessons that were learned along the way. Amazon launched Amazon Care, which was amazing and had a huge market. But in the background, it wasn't set up very well. It wasn't substantial enough. The infrastructure wasn't there. They didn't know how well it would be received. So one could say, oh, I was part of Amazon Care, and because it was sundown really quickly, that was a failure. No, but they used all of those learnings to relaunch it in another and better capacity. So there's never shame in failure stories. And a lot of times, interviewers or leadership are more intrigued by those, just as you've said.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Thank you for taking us back and making that point because that's a really important point for the listeners. Don't shy away from trying and failing and saying, "But here's what I learned, and here's how I've applied those learnings to win the next time."
It all counts.
Yeah, we have a saying: "We win or we learn." Right? You don't get in trouble here for failing. We win or we learn. Just make sure you learn something from it, so we don't repeat the same mistake twice.
Right.
But
That's
we
the
win or we
goal.
learn. Yeah, yeah. Jennifer, if we fast forward back then to you're at McKinsey and you're dealing with change management and product adoption, walk us through that and specifically how you would stay on top or help your client stay on top of the trends.
So, when in my first few years at the firm, I was actually brought on to help found and build out the entire experience design capability. So, user experience design. And I think I learned more about change management and adoption going through all of that than I did when I was just in a product adoption role, which kind of seemed easy after that. um,
Yeah, for sure.
there
Sure.
was so much to learn, and I tell my clients now, and I did all of this working with these amazingly brilliant, change resistant people at the firm, to lead with empathy. You can't just assume that because the people you're working with as I erroneously assumed, are brilliant and in this culture of learning and always seeking to have something else to conquer and whatever, you can't just assume that they are not human, that they are not also resistant to change. So leading with empathy and folding in those people to be on the journey with you, help to educate them, be kind, be patient, helped in product adoption, whether it was when I was first building out the experience design group or in the product adoption role. And I tell my clients to stay on top of trends and kind of manage themselves in their own product adoption, Delta word product, whatever it is, trends. Some of my clients are terrified of AI and what it may or may not mean for their profession. I tell them to have the same empathy for themselves that they would for somebody else and take it in stride, spend time learning about those things. If they want to embrace some of those changes, if those changes or trends make sense for them, then just start doing it. I'm a big fan of the book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. So just start doing it first, make some mistakes, try the roll on for size, and then adjust as you go along. I discourage spending lots of time introspecting and thinking about your leadership style and all of that sort of introspection, that individual work. I don't know how much change can come about when you are your own audience. Change and growth really happens by stepping out there and stumbling through some of those things. If you can do anything to smooth the way for yourself by educating yourself on X trend, whatever that is, definitely do so. An educated chance is better than not just jumping into the fire and hoping for the best. But like learning a language, you might make terrible mistakes and accidentally swear at people. I've definitely done that in other countries, said very offensive things by just having the wrong accent on a certain syllable. But I think by and large, people are open to that. They know you're trying, they know you're working to learn. And so just jump out there and get involved. Try to get amongst the people or in the trend that you want to be part of and start living it, start doing it. If you may find that you don't even like it, then you had nothing to be nervous about anyway. And at least you didn't waste time striving towards some industry or some role that you didn't actually like in the end.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you later for a recommendation, but people that listen to this know that I read constantly, and I probably read, I think I'm up to like 80, 100 books a year now. But I'm always big on underlining, taking notes, and then, okay, how do I apply this? And even writing in my business journal, how I will, can apply this, or even, putting the book down and typing an email right then to somebody, hey, we need to implement this and let's talk about this tomorrow. Because so many people, as you said, they'll introspect, they'll reflect, they'll educate, but that's great. You can't learn guitar by reading a book. You got to pick up the guitar and play it, right? Mm-hmm. And start fumbling through the chords you'll never get great at anything by just reading about it or just thinking about it. You got to do it. But that's where fear comes in. And fear will prevent people from jumping in because, as you to reference your earlier statement, God forbid they fail. But
right, or make a mistake.
That's the only way you learn. Yeah, it's the only way you learn. That the most elite athletes in the world miss more shots, strike out more, make more mistakes than anybody else. They get paid a whole lot of money because they'll practice and practice and practice to improve that, 2%, 3%, whatever it is. Right. And business should be the same way. Yeah.
Perfectionism rarely has big results.
Exactly. Better done than perfect. Yeah. Hey, everyone. As you know, I don't have any advertisements nor sponsorships on this podcast. My only ask of you, the listener, is that you share this podcast with someone that you know, a friend, a family member, a coworker, or a colleague who may benefit from this information, may benefit from today's guest, from the value that they're they're sharing with the audience, with you, the listener. When you share this podcast and our audience grows, it allows me to book more and more guests who have a great message, great nuggets of wisdom that you can benefit from. And again, your network can benefit from. So please, right now, push that share button, send it to somebody that you care about, and let's get back to the interview. So let's break this apart in two ways. This is interviewing and career growth and career coaching is your expertise. So from an employer standpoint, we have listeners who own their own businesses, and having a great team is the only way you can build a great business. Mm-hmm. It's the only way. So if you're an employer, what advice could you give that employer around interviewing, around building that great team? And then just, of course, I'm going to ask you on the flip side of this answer, if you're an employee, but let's start with an employer, because we have a lot of listeners who are employers or they're in leadership positions and, higher levels in corporate America. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give them around interviewing to build that great team?
My most favorite thing that I've learned in all of my years of interview training and reading about interviewing, as a kid, I looked up to Barbara Walters, which probably sounds so nerdy, but she's just such an amazing interviewer, and interviewed many of the greatest people in the world. My favorite thing that I learned was at Amazon, which is using the term culture fit. Those are actually dirty words, which for me was utterly shocking after being in recruiting for so many years. Like I said, reading so much about interviewing all these years, I was thinking culture fit. That's such a standard and recruiter speak for somebody not being a fit. But I realized that is such an easy blanket for bias in some capacity. If a person doesn't fit for your organization, or even if you're a one-person business and you don't think that they'll be a fit, force yourself to find data, force yourself to find real reasons why your maybe gut is not telling you that person would be a good match for your needs. And I think having really stringent interview requirements around how and who you'll hire, having black and white criteria, maybe it's 3 points. You have the first being black and white skills. Can they do the actual role? And a couple of things as double clicks from there, having really black and white criteria about what you need in X hire helps people to refrain from sunflowering, which is hiring in your own likeness, gender bias, any kind of bias. So it helps interviewers to keep all of it very intellectual and not so emotional. And I think those are the biggest takeaways that I've learned from all of these years. Yeah, that's my favorite thing.
I think it was Edward Deming, "In God we trust, everyone else bring data."
Yes.
Everyone else bring data.
Yeah.
So let's flip that. You're a candidate and you're interviewing. You just gave some great tips on being an interviewer. Now, as an interviewee, what advice, we only have so much time on the show, but what advice would you give an interviewee so they have a better shot at interviewing?
I tell my candidates, do as much as possible to ask questions rather than just slinging noodles at the wall to see what sticks. Try to really understand, what are the objectives in this role? If it's a big company like Amazon, study the leadership principles. If it's McKinsey, study the firm values. They're all published online. Go deep on those. What do they actually mean? If you're interviewing for a small company like yourself or a one business person, ask questions. You may not be a fit, and that's okay. You want to find a fit too. If you're not a fit, that's a gift. Then and you don't have to waste your time joining a terrible place that you won't like. So find out more about the role. Sometimes the information's in a job description and sometimes not. Amazon's job descriptions are sufficiently vague. And I know when I first started interviewing, I read it 1,000 times. It told me nothing. So don't necessarily rely on the job description. People really bank on those because it's kind of all you've got. Try to have an initial informational. Go deep with
Yeah.
the recruiter or the hiring manager if you can, and say, what do you really need? If you can ferret out that you are not a fit, do that before you jump into a formal interview, and then it's permanently in a database or emblazoned on the mind of the small business owner, whatever it is. Do everything to set yourself up for success, and you do that by asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah. When you said that, I couldn't help but think, I've interviewed thousands and thousands of people and probably hired 1,000 people. And I am always most impressed when I love when they've done research on my companies, or, when I was working in a bigger company. But what always moved the needle for me in their favor was, what are you looking for in this role, as far as what are you trying to achieve with this role? Like,
Right.
the interviewee asking me that, and how would I know if I am winning if I get this job? Like, what would 90
What does
days, 180
success look
days from now?
like?
Yes, and then when I would be a little bit vague, they would say, but more specifically,
Right.
on a performance appraisal, how do I crush that? Yeah,
Right.
that's the person I know is already thinking, I'm going to do everything I can in this role,
Right.
versus, how many days of vacation do you get, or what? Come on,
Right.
like that. Save that
Right.
for HR.
Can
Yeah,
that just
yeah, yeah,
come
yeah.
later or never?
Exactly. Or never.
No,
Exactly.
I completely agree. And I've told so many candidates over the years, interest and ambition can overplay actual skills, because there have been times that I'll have a candidate that is the square peg, square hole. On paper, they're the best hire. They have exactly black and white what's needed, but I know they don't have um, the thick skin that's needed to really try and fail, or
Yep.
for a particular leader. I know that they just won't be able to accept that person's management style, whatever it is. Um, you can have a less experienced person who has the right, you could say DNA, or just the right ingredients, because DNA sounds so permanent. And I think so much of this is learnable.
Hmm.
um, if you just dive deep on what's really needed and sort of forget, even if a person really needs a job, I think that makes it challenging. But if you move away from that and move to a mindset of being strategic, and how you'll actually solve those problems, how you'll create impact, and how it will be impactful for you, that's how you find a really solid match. And then on the flip side of that, that's how employers really create retention. You've done all of that early stuff where nobody's sort of peacocking and just presenting their best self or best side, but really exposing themselves to one another in terms of skill set and strategic needs.
Yeah. I always, I have 100 now, 150 or so franchisees, and I share with them when they're interviewing, because they have to hire their independent businesses, of course, under our umbrella, but they do all their own hiring. It's their own business. That when you're hiring somebody, that first interview, that is as good as it's going to get. That's the first date. That's when everybody's on their best behavior. It's like going on a first date. So when I hear somebody say, like, well, I didn't like this or I didn't like that, but I think I could probably change them. No, no, ripcord, pull it, because,
Right.
and
And
usually
why
it's around, like,
change them?
yes, there's 360 million people in this country. You can find somebody else.
Right.
But it's the word you said that bell went off is, ambition. You said another, but there was two words, but one was ambition
And
can
interest.
override an interest, can override a skill gap. Skills are teachable. Like all
Hmm.
selling skills, leadership, that's learnable.
Hmm.
If you can teach ambition, please teach me, because I've never been able to teach ambition. I've never been able to teach work ethic like that. You can't put in what God left out.
Right.
And if they don't
And
have it by the time,
curiosity.
yeah, if they don't have it by the time we meet, they're probably not going to have it. No, the skills, that's fine. We can, if you have ambition, you'll learn it. You'll put in the extra time, you'll learn it. And I'm glad you said that. Let's pivot slightly, Jennifer, to you're an advocate for, in a great way, for women in leadership. And I'm curious, have you found more companies are elevating women in the workplace, or are you still seeing some of that met with resistance?
So I think that it's a combination. I think that more and more organizations are talking about it. The level of actually embracing it and putting specific programs in place, I think it varies. And depending on the size of the organization, it depends on the size of teams. The specific team that a person's on can really vary in terms of how supportive they are of women or any kind of diverse person being part of a team. I know that McKinsey, for example, does a lot of research on women in leadership, and not just for itself, but for, I think they survey in the last study, it was something like 5,000 organizations. I'll need to check my numbers on that. But they surveyed a lot of organizations to talk to them about programs they're putting in place to create mentorship groups or in some way elevate women. So it's difficult to say with a broad paintbrush that more companies are embracing it. I think it varies. I think it varies by company size. I know it's on a lot more companies' minds, which is a good thing, because the only way you can't change what you don't acknowledge. And if you've got
Mm,
an entire leadership team that's all non-diverse people,
yeah.
I don't want to sound biased and say all white men, but if you've got a
Yeah.
whole leader,
All old white guys. Yeah, sure.
yes, then
Yeah.
how easy is it for everyone to just preach to the choir? How smooth and easygoing is it for people with all the same backgrounds and same viewpoints? But all of the research is showing that real innovation and growth comes from having different kinds of people on a team. Just
Yep.
one different person on a team creates more robust decisions, and that directly translates into more profitability.
Yeah. Amen. Here at the companies that we own right now, just the way the chips have fallen as we've built this team over the last 6 7 years, women outnumber men in our companies 3 to 1. And somebody asked me that, was that intentional? And I said, no, we just hire the best person. Like,
Right,
the flat out, we just hire the best person, uh, regardless of gender, color, whatever. I want
right,
the best person that's going to generate the most profit. I'm
right.
a dyed in the wool capitalist, is what I'm trying to say, and which means I want to make the most profit so I can serve the most people. If I don't make profit, I can't serve our customers. I won't be
Hmm.
around to serve them. And so we want the best team. But it is funny just the way we've grown this company. And I also think that this particular time in the world, you have women staying in the work, going to the workforce, at a school, staying in the workforce,
Hmm.
delaying having children a little bit longer. I just think sociologically that's happening, which means that you get to then choose the best people, regardless of any of that. You're able to choose the best person because you're getting to choose from that entire label pool, not just who happens to you know not be at home raising a child or not be whatever. And it's
Right.
worked out great for us.
It's so interesting because when I was at McKinsey, we had the same experience. There were so many women leaders, and I started um, inadvertently attracting so much attention from leaders all across the firm in different countries saying, "How do you have so many women in leadership?" And I don't know if it was because the woman that I partnered with to found the Experience Design Group was a woman, and so that had some kind of natural attraction, or if it's, I mean, I believe in my heart of hearts, I know from trying very hard to build those first teams, a lot of the people we were going after had no interest in working for a place like McKinsey. It was, in fact, many people's antithesis.
Sure.
Many of the first hundreds of calls I would log into, the people would initiate the conversation. With all due respect, I have no idea why I'm talking to you. I'd say that's great. That's why we should be
Yep.
talking.
Yeah.
But organically, we hired so many women and so many women on the leadership team. And just as you said, we hired the best people.
Yeah. That's that's it. It shouldn't matter. Like, just the best person. The flip side of that coin, what do you see the women that you coach? What do you see them doing wrong where they may be getting in their own way to grow and to excel?
Unfortunately, it's a lot of the challenges that women have always faced. It's imposter syndrome, which not only women face, actually, some of my male clients suffer from this too. Um, Women seem to suffer from it more. At least that's what the research shows us. But I suspect there are cultural difference. Lots of people can suffer from it. I don't think that it
Sure,
has
sure.
a bias. But
Yeah.
imposter syndrome, um, being too apologetic, being too perfectionistic.
Mm.
All research shows us that women will only apply to jobs if they believe they have anywhere between 80 and 100% of the skills, whereas men will apply to a job if they have anywhere between 40 to 60% of those skills,
Wow.
which is part of why I emphasized don't rely heavily on a job description to fill you in on a given role, because now many companies have completely rewritten them to cast a larger net, so they are
Mhm.
sufficiently vague by design, and that is a good thing. It can be frustrating for candidates, but understanding that there is a purpose in that, and it does tend to bring in more female candidates. So I tried to coach my female candidates on building the confidence, not being afraid of making mistakes. As I said, really educating themselves on strategic objectives and how they match those and how they can create their own impact. And then focusing on the impact that they have created in the past and that they continue to create present day and that they want to create going forward. And this is part of why it's so important to day one of your new job, or starting today if you've been there 25 years, start to document your successes and failures, quote unquote,
Yeah.
and
You're learning.
articulate a
Yeah.
little story around that so that you can share that with other people you may want to talk to about a promotion. Never assuming that, even if you had people on your same team, you can't assume that they were on the emotional journey with you. Maybe there were side conversations happening, or somebody having a personal tragedy in their life you had to mentor them through, or just they just weren't making it. Whatever it was, document all of those things, because it builds your intellectual inventory of your abilities and how you achieved things successfully or not successfully, and what you learned from those. And as you document your own successes, you can articulate those. And even if you don't have to articulate them, you show them in your presence. And then you start to build your executive presence. And executive presence can happen at any stage in your career, right out of undergrad, right out of graduate school, 25, 30 years into your role, whatever it is, start now. And that means confidence, knowing your role, your company objectives, communicating. And then I always like to say, think like a CEO. And people will say, I don't know what CEOs do. What does that even mean? It means think strategically, look around corners, anticipate challenges, anticipate things that might not go well, anticipate things that could go well, encourage other people to be risk takers, be a risk taker, those kinds of things.
Yeah. As a CEO, I can tell them to also stare at the ceiling at night for hours upon hours and just like, what do we do? What do we no,
No, don't do
so
that.
yeah, exactly.
Just get up and
As I
watch
did.
Netflix.
Yeah. So I did that this last night. So I guess one final question before I ask you for a recommendation. Is there anything that you see companies that are beating the crowd? They're beating the crowd, right? They're getting to look, if it's Google and it's Microsoft, they're always going to be able to pay the most. They're always going to be able to offer the best benefits. And the average company, I've got 27 people in my company. I can't compete with that. 99% of the companies can't compete with that. What do you
Hmm.
see companies that are able to compete with that and excel, knowing that they probably can't match some of that stuff, but they still get top level talent? Is there just one? I'm sure there's probably, it's multifactorial, but is there one or two things you could offer the listeners that if they own companies, do this because it'll give you a leg up?
Absolutely. And in fact, I worked with clients at McKinsey hundred-year old insurance company that has an inferiority complex, needing to build a UX team or technology team and wanting to compete with Google, but being in the middle of Minnesota. How can they do
Yeah.
that? I think any company, no matter how large, it's all about what your value proposition. In the same way that I tell my clients, or in the past my candidates, focus on your value proposition. It may or may not be a match, and that's okay, because each side is looking for a match. But if you have a candidate that you have your heart set on, it doesn't matter if you have the best benefits or the most resources or no resources. I joined um, Indeed.com when there were 30 employees, and my chair for a while was a printer paper box.
Awesome. That's
And
awesome.
there was no heat in the office because I loved the value proposition. It was exciting.
Yeah.
I believed in it. I knew it would work. I loved
Yep.
the CEO and all of his curmudgeonly ways. This was a different CEO. This was the
Sure.
original founder. And
Sure.
I wanted to be part of it. So whether you're one person or you're a 100-year-old insurance company, there's no reason ever to have some kind of inferiority complex to Google or Amazon, because they don't always offer the best pay. Sometimes they're very arrogant about compensation, thinking, well, we're Google or we're Amazon or Microsoft. If you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. We can get anyone. When I
Yeah.
first started at Google, in fact, Google underpaid people. I can remember my first hire, I was embarrassed to deliver my offer because it was
Wow.
so insulting to this amazing candidate.
Yeah.
But Google's attitude was, well, if he doesn't take the offer, he's not googly anyway. And
Wow.
so that made my job really challenging. But
Yeah.
it's no different from any small business owner. If you have your heart set on somebody, articulate to them why they would be happy. Help them get on board with your vision. Help them feel your passion. Obviously, you're passionate about it because you've struck out on your own and you're doing it. Somebody will want to get in there with you and slog through the good times and the bad to come out on the other side and realize the vision.
Well said. Well said. Thank you for that. Again, I talked about being an avid reader. Is there a book that, and you mentioned one earlier, but is there a book that you could recommend based on the topic we've been discussing today that you would recommend to the listeners, whether it be on how to interview or how to be an interviewee, that could really help them go to the next level in their career? Is there a book that you could name?
It's probably the book I mentioned earlier. I'm like you. I'm
Sure.
always reading multiple
Yeah.
books and have multiple audiobooks at the same time
Yeah.
for training for a marathon. So it's hard to say one particular book, but right now I feel like my sort of guiding light advice to people that really resonates with me is Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader by Erminia Ibarra. And it's
Okay.
all about just start doing the role that you want, embody it, join focus groups, join outside groups that relate to that company or the team that you want to be on. If you're inside a big organization, find people that are part of the group that you want to join. If you're wanting to join a startup and need to learn certain skills, start learning those. Just dive in and do the role that you want to achieve. Ultimately, people will see you in the role that you want, and you will see yourself in that role because you're living it and you're breathing it. And in fact, McKinsey didn't promote people until they saw people doing that role and were promotable to actually do it.
We'll actually put that title and author in the show notes so people can just click on it to find it. That sounds like a great recommendation. I really appreciate you sharing what you just shared about doing the role. I've I've espoused that for 25 years. Do the role you want before you're ever asked to do that role, for two reasons. One, because you should, and for all the reasons you just shared. But also, if you want me to promote you or whomever to promote you, when that promotion happens, everyone in the office should go, well, yeah, of course. I mean, she was already doing the role. Yeah, I mean,
No brainer.
that's yeah, no brainer. That's a lot. What you don't want is she got promoted. What, that's the worst, because now you've got a culture issue, and you've got people questioning things. So always do the role you want before you're ever asked to do it, and it makes your leader's job super easy. and very low risk to make that promotion. So I'm really glad that you stressed that.
I would also stress that if people have a fear of failure and that's what holds them back from the idea of how can I just do the role that I want, it's it, and it's intuitive that people would be fearful about that and not wanting to make a mistake. But actually, there are times that one's mistake would be insightful and informative to others around it. And it can make people pause and go, oh gosh, we didn't even realize that that was difficult to implement, or that's actually a glitch we should work on, or wow, just the fact that they offered that insight helps us and informs XYZ as we go along. So whatever your contributions are, remember that they're unique and it may turn out to be the most valuable thing ever. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll fail. Remember that learning through failure is still valuable.
Yeah.
Very valuable.
Yep. Um, awesome. Couple last questions, and these are different. We're going to take a left turn, but if we go to the very end of your life, you're going to live this wonderful, rich, beautiful life, but we get to the end and we're at your funeral and you're looking down from above and a loved one is reading your eulogy. But Jennifer, they're only allowed to choose 3 descriptors to share with all the attendees. And those 3 descriptors are how they would describe you and your life. What 3 words do you hope they say about you?
Oh my gosh, that's really difficult. I guess I would hope that it would be very known and understood. I'm extremely empathetic. I really, really care about people and people doing well, whatever that is, whether it's my brother or my client or whatever company I'm working for. I really, really care about success as that person or company defines it. I'm also very persistent. I don't give up. I have to be knocked down, missing limbs that won't grow back to really give up on something.
Sure.
And last, I believe deeply in humor. I think if you can find humor in everything, particularly the worst moments, find something ridiculous to laugh about. I think it's a key to longevity.
Yeah, great. There's, of course, there's no right answer. It's just always wonderful to hear what people are striving toward. Right? Those are the 3 things you should strive for every single day. Then, and then lastly, or second to last, if you had a magic wand, and this is where it's kind of fun to suspend reality, and you could wave this magic wand and make one change to our world, one change to the way the world is today, so that when we wake up tomorrow, the world is different according to Jennifer. How would the world be different according to Jennifer tomorrow?
So it may sound contrived, but I really genuinely believe if men and women the world over were on much more equal footing, I really genuinely believe that would create change, that would affect change. Women bring such different characteristics to life, to the business world, to leadership, to teams than men. And it's all complementary. I mean, certainly there would be friction, but good things come from friction. All of the research shows it about innovation and profitability and all of those capitalist ideals. But it bleeds into social issues, culture issues. I just think that if men and women were really, really on equal footing, that so many conflicts would mitigate and be dealt with in a better way.
Awesome. Well, most important question, if people want to connect with you, follow you, get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Okay, my site is www.jenniferspecial.com. Jennifer, common spelling Jennifer, and my last name is spelled just like the word special with an E on the end, SPECIALE.com. Or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Really appreciate your time today, and just a good, genuine conversation. So I enjoyed this. This was, I think, enlightening for the listeners and certainly for me. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for tuning in to the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any of the resources that we mentioned during the podcast. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. You can connect with me on any of the socials at Real Roger Martin. And be sure to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thanks again for tuning in.